These documents contain the research results of a scientist by the name of Aldrich von Hagenhild. Must be some relative of the Countess. Von Hagenhild spent his time searching for the World Soul. Christ, can't these people just use sensible names? The basis for von Hagenhild's research was the concept that for an organism to develop as it should, there must be some immaterial power steering it in the right direction. Basically, an invisible blueprint determining form and growth. So, why does a rabbit develop the way it does, and why does a pine tree become a pine tree? Who's the architect? What tells them to grow bark? Or fancy lady rabbits? Looks like these questions led von Hagenhild to believe there was some invisible, imperceptible field that controls the development of an organism. He called it morphogenetics. Von Hagenhild explains the holistic aspect of self-organizing systems with his theory of morphogenetic fields. Basically, the field stores forms or behavioral patterns that every member of a species draws from and adds to. This was his Western take on something the East had known for some time. In Far Eastern philosophy, people refer to his morphogenetic fields as the divine essence of nature, or as the soul. He thought he'd identified the soul. He didn't think the soul was a spiritual thing. He thought it was a fundamental principle of nature that had been warped and confused by religions the world over. He even thought he had proof. He refers to certain experiments he carried out. Ugh, this is a lot of information to take in. Von Hagenhild really believed that in these morphogenetic fields, he'd identified the soul, the central power behind all living things. These documents refer to several experiments which are supposed to prove the existence of morphogenetic fields. Von Hagenhild wanted to prove that every species obtains its entire being, its form, its instincts from these fields, like some kind of collective memory. These inherited memories control not just the form, but also the behavior, the capabilities, and the knowledge of the relevant species. He called it a group soul. Experiment number 1, the rat experiment. The experiment investigated the capability of rats to find their way through a maze. At the beginning of the experiment, the rats needed 165 attempts before they could get through the maze without a mistake. But a few rat generations later, the number of attempts had dropped to 20. Conclusion: the first batch of rats learned how to navigate the maze, and this instinct was somehow added to the rat's group soul. When later rats navigated the maze, they somehow had access to this ancestral memory, even if the rats weren't directly related. Experiment number 2, the ape experiment. 2 ape colonies of the same species were isolated and observed on 2 small islands in the Indian Ocean. Von Hagenhild's team taught the apes on one island a few new behavioral patterns. The other colony was left undisturbed and uninfluenced, so while the apes on the first island are learning how to open tins and the like, the others are eating bananas. Several months later, the apes on the undisturbed island began displaying these new skills, even though they'd never come into contact with the other colony. Von Hagenhild's conclusion: all members of a species are connected by morphogenetic fields. They share a subconscious collective memory. He thought this theory could explain a lot. Animals' sense for impending danger, telepathy, sixth sense in humans. Von Hagenhild also concludes that members of a group can learn something new at a far quicker pace when the vast majority of members of that same group have already acquired the knowledge. These fields are basically stores of information that are effective across space, and in rare cases even time. Von Hagenhild presumes this would go some way towards explaining premonitions, human beings sporadically accessing morphogenetic fields from varying points in the future. It all sounds very far-fetched, but then it does explain a lot. Supposing morphogenetic fields really exist, they'd be the answer to problems science has been trying to solve for centuries. And if all these fields add up, if there's some kind of central repository of all this information, Christ, it'd basically be the scientific definition of God. I'm beginning to understand why the Tula Society's quite so interested. And if there's even the slightest chance it's all true, why they need to be stopped. Is this the Piri Reis map? It's hand-drawn, ancient. There are some notes next to it. Finally, von Hagenhild became convinced that there must be a type of definitive field from which all other fields are derived. All manifestations have an origin. He tried to back this up with historical evidence. A world soul, for instance, had been proposed by Plato over 2,000 years ago. But what really convinced him was the discovery of an old mysterious map of the world, drawn by the Ottoman general Piri Reis. I knew it! It's the map! Let's see. Further on in the text, von Hagenhild discovered that the general had drawn up the map in the 16th century, using sources which were thousands of years old. But how could they have known at that time what the world looked like? He posed the theory that a civilization had existed then, which possessed extraordinary knowledge and skill. He discovered a marking on the map, which was written in an unfamiliar language. Research in Far Eastern libraries revealed it was a long-forgotten Tibetan script. Once translated, it claimed the marking indicated the source of all knowledge, the center of the morphogenetic fields. It was a hidden valley in the Himalayas, Shambhala. Shortly before he died in 1934, von Hagenhild passed the responsibility of continuing the research onto his daughter. Professor Hayes was right about everything. The Tula Society arrived at the exact same conclusion as he did. They were just one step ahead. Lucky I'm one step more. Richard used the first key to pass through the gate in that secret room in the monastery. I just need to find the second. The Nazis can't enter Shambhala without it, and as it happens, I have the eye, and I have the map. I just need to use them to find the location of the second key. My last hope of finding Richard is based on an ancient legend. Great. It's time to cross everything I've got. And I mean everything. Fingers crossed. I've come all this way, but I'm still a little surprised it actually worked. The Piri Reis map really is the map of the Guardians of Shambhala. Or at least it was drawn to their specifications. So Professor Hayes was also right in thinking the priests of Shambhala took the second key artifact to India and hid it in a temple there. And now I know exactly where to look. On the Kathiawar Peninsula, just north of Bombay. Thinking about it, I actually know the commander of the British regiment in Rajkot. If the old drunkard hasn't been transferred for disciplinary reasons again, I'm sure he'll lend me a hand. Or at least a decent bottle. Then, I'll just have to find the temple and get hold of the key artifact. What could be simpler?